When Jane Goodall looked back on her life, she often said she wanted people to understand that everyone has a role to play and that every life matters. In one of her final interviews before she passed away on October 1, 2025, she was asked a question that took her back to a part of her life few people truly knew about: her marriage to the man she divorced in 1974. She spoke about their past briefly, then suddenly added, "And now I'm exposing his," before stopping herself mid-sentence. The interviewer waited, but she only smiled, as if choosing to keep some truths locked inside forever. The world knew her as the woman who changed how humanity saw itself through her connection with chimpanzees. Yet behind her fame, her research, and her calm public image was a complicated love story, one that didn't fall apart because of betrayal or scandal, but because of something much deeper and harder to explain. What she revealed during her final year of life made people see her marriage in a completely new light. Long before she became an icon, Jane Goodall was just a curious young woman with no scientific degree, a notebook, and a pair of binoculars. In 1960, she arrived in what was then called Tanganyika, ready to study wild chimpanzees. At the time, many scientists thought the idea was foolish. But within months, she changed not only what humans knew about chimpanzees but also what we understood about ourselves. Her discovery that chimpanzees made and used tools shocked the scientific world because, until then, tool-making had been considered something only humans could do. Her gentle patience, empathy, and detailed observations challenged the belief that science had to be cold and emotionless. Her approach made people realize that compassion could also lead to great discoveries. She spent her early years in Gombe National Park living in near-total isolation. The forest was harsh, the land unforgiving, and communication with the outside world took weeks through letters. Yet Jane thrived in that loneliness. Every sound, every movement of the forest became her world. She wasn't just studying chimpanzees, she was trying to understand life itself. Her quiet dedication made her famous, but it also made her mysterious. People wanted to know how this woman could live alone in the wild for so long. To many, she became a symbol of devotion and courage, someone who gave her life to understanding creatures most people feared or ignored. When National Geographic learned of her extraordinary discoveries, they decided her work needed to be shared with the public. They sent a young Dutch photographer, Baron Hugo van Lawick, to film and photograph her research. That decision changed Jane's life forever. She later admitted that at first, she didn't want him there. She was afraid his presence would scare the chimpanzees and undo months of hard work. Her mission was everything to her, and she didn't want cameras to disturb it. But when Hugo arrived, her fears slowly faded. He wasn't just a photographer, he was someone who understood the wild the way she did. He had a deep respect for animals, and his photographs captured not just images but emotions. They began working side by side, often spending long hours together observing the chimpanzees. He filmed her work in such vivid, respectful ways that the scientific community finally started to take her research seriously. Before Hugo, many male scientists dismissed Jane's work as too emotional or unscientific, even criticizing her for giving the chimpanzees names like David Greybeard instead of numbers. But Hugo's films and photos proved her right. They showed the world that her observations were real, that the chimps had personalities, intelligence, and emotions. In him, she found someone who believed in her completely. Out there, surrounded by the whispers of the forest and the distant calls of the chimps, love grew quietly between them. It wasn't sudden or passionate, it was gentle, natural, and built on shared purpose. In 1964, Jane Goodall and Hugo van Lawick married at Chelsea Old Church in London. For a while, they seemed like the perfect pair, the scientist and the photographer, united by a shared love for the natural world. They lived and worked together in the heart of Tanzania, their lives revolving around research and discovery. His camera and her notebook told the same story from two different viewpoints, one visual and one emotional. Together, they created a legacy that would forever change how humans viewed other species. Their honeymoon was unlike any other. Instead of beaches or cities, they returned to Gombe to live among the chimpanzees. Theirs was a marriage born in the wild, surrounded by the same creatures that had brought them together. Every day followed the rhythm of the forest. They woke to the sounds of rustling leaves and chimpanzee calls, spent hours following the animals through dense vegetation, and at night they catalogued notes and photographs by the soft glow of lanterns. It was a simple, pure life. Jane finally felt she had everything she wanted: love, purpose, and the forest that had become her home. But Hugo was a restless spirit. While Jane felt complete in Gombe, Hugo longed to explore other places. He wanted to document wildlife across Africa, to see and capture more than just chimpanzees. In 1967, their son, Hugo Eric Louis, whom they called Grub, was born. His arrival brought joy to their small camp, transforming it into a home. Jane carried him on her back as she had once carried her notebooks, showing him the beauty of nature from the very start. For a while, it seemed like Jane had found the perfect balance. She was a wife, a mother, and still a dedicated scientist. But life in isolation began to weigh heavily on both of them. The same forest that had brought them together started to separate them. Hugo had to travel for his photography assignments, while Jane stayed rooted in Gombe to continue her lifelong study. Their dreams were no longer moving in the same direction. He chased horizons, she stayed with the trees. She later said it had been a good marriage, one based on mutual respect and care, but their devotion to their work always came first. Each time Hugo left, she had to choose between following him or staying with the chimpanzees. Eventually, that choice became too heavy to ignore. By the early 1970s, Jane and Hugo had become global symbols of love and discovery. Their films and photographs had inspired millions, and their partnership had reshaped science and conservation. But underneath that image of unity, cracks were beginning to form. The first real change came from outside their control. National Geographic, which had funded their work for years, decided to move its resources elsewhere. Hugo's role as the official photographer at Gombe ended, and with it went the support that allowed him to live and work beside Jane. New opportunities appeared for him in other parts of Africa, particularly in the Serengeti, where he could film lions and other wildlife. For a man who loved movement and adventure, turning down such offers was impossible. Jane, however, could not leave. Gombe wasn't just a workplace, it was her life's calling. She had built a bond with the chimpanzees that no one else had. She knew their faces, their personalities, their struggles. To her, leaving them would feel like abandoning her family. So while Hugo traveled for new assignments, Jane stayed behind. Their letters became shorter, their visits less frequent. Slowly, love turned into distance, not through anger, but through time and purpose. Still, Jane never spoke bitterly about Hugo. She described him as a good man, a passionate explorer who couldn't be confined to one place. Their paths had simply diverged. When they eventually divorced in 1974, they remained friends. She even continued to speak of him with admiration, saying his photographs had given her work the visibility it needed to change the world. But during her final years, when she looked back on that time, there was a faint sadness in her words, as if she still carried the weight of what might have been. Behind her calm public persona was a woman who had given everything to her purpose, perhaps too much. The sacrifices she made for science and conservation came at a personal cost. Yet Jane never expressed regret. She believed every experience, every loss, every moment in the forest had shaped her into who she was meant to be. Her marriage, though it ended, had played a vital role in her story. Without Hugo, the world might never have seen her work the way it did. Without Jane, Hugo's camera might never have captured the spirit of nature so intimately. As she neared the end of her life, Jane often reflected on the strange intersection between love and purpose. She once said that true understanding of animals, of people, of the world requires empathy, patience, and the willingness to see beyond oneself. Perhaps that was what her marriage had taught her most of all, that love isn't always meant to last forever, but that it can still leave something eternal behind. In her final interview, when she hinted at exposing her husband's truth, it wasn't anger that flickered in her eyes. It was understanding. She had seen the full circle of life, from the wild hearts of chimpanzees to the fragile nature of human relationships. Jane Goodall's story wasn't just about science or fame, it was about humanity itself. Her discoveries reminded us that compassion and intelligence are not limited to humans, and her life reminded us that love, even when it fades, can still be profound. Even as her health declined, she continued to inspire generations to care for the planet, to respect all living beings, and to find purpose in kindness. Her message remained simple but powerful. Every person has a role to play, and every life, human or animal, matters deeply. Jane Goodall lived her truth until the very end, not as a scientist detached from emotion, but as a human being who saw connection in all things. And though her love story with Hugo van Lawick ended decades ago, it remains one of the most beautiful examples of how passion for discovery and love for another soul can coexist, even if only for a while, under the wild African sky. Jane Goodall's life was never about ordinary choices. For her, Gombe wasn't just a research site where she studied chimpanzees. It was the center of her heart, the place where she truly belonged. She had spent years there, watching generations of chimpanzees grow up, form families, and pass away. Each of them had become part of her life, like an extended family she could never abandon. Her connection to them wasn't just scientific, it was emotional. When people later asked her why she never left Gombe even when her marriage was falling apart, she said simply, "I couldn't leave Gombe. I had to stay." Those few words carried a deep sadness. Her commitment, her focus, and her refusal to compromise, the very traits that made her remarkable, were the same traits that made her marriage impossible to sustain. Days turned into months, and months turned into years of separation. The life that she and Hugo van Lawick once shared slowly drifted apart, not because of anger or betrayal, but because their paths no longer crossed. Friends noticed the distance growing between them. Hugo's letters from the Serengeti were full of excitement about new filming projects, while Jane's journals became more reflective, filled with thoughts about solitude and purpose. Her writings once centered on chimpanzees' emotional depth, their ability to love, grieve, and empathize. But now, her words mirrored her own loneliness. The bond she once studied in animals had become the same kind of emotional ache she was living through. Their love had been born in the wilderness, and in a way, the wilderness reclaimed it. Both of them were drawn toward their own callings, Hugo to the endless landscapes of Africa and the thrill of capturing life through his camera, and Jane to the forest that had become her home. She began to wonder whether it was truly possible to love both a mission and a man with the same intensity. That silent question hung over her life long after her marriage ended. By the time Jane Goodall and Hugo officially divorced in 1974, their separation wasn't a sudden heartbreak but a quiet acknowledgement of reality. They had lived apart for years, communicating through letters and rare visits that were tender but brief. To outsiders, it seemed like a simple story, a couple torn apart by distance and work. But for Jane, the truth ran much deeper. She often spoke about their split with calm honesty. "He had to go on with his career, and I couldn't leave Gombe," she said. It sounds simple, but it was sad. That sadness didn't come from anger. It came from knowing she had to choose between her life's mission and her marriage. For Jane, Gombe was not just a place, it was her entire purpose. Leaving would have meant abandoning decades of research and the chimpanzees she had grown to love as individuals. Staying meant losing the man who had once been her closest companion. In her heart, she knew she couldn't walk away from her life's work. She had seen the fragility of the chimpanzees' world, the threats they faced from deforestation and human interference. She felt a responsibility to protect them. Each time she looked into their eyes, she saw a reflection of humanity. To her, leaving would have felt like betrayal. When she later talked about her marriage, she did so without bitterness. "I wish we could have carried on," she once said. Her tone wasn't regretful, it was factual, almost analytical. Jane had always been able to separate emotion from observation. To her, love wasn't just a feeling. It was something you understood, studied, and accepted for what it was. Her marriage hadn't failed, it had simply evolved into something no longer compatible with the lives they were living. Hugo's passion was movement, new lands, new wildlife, new stories to tell. Jane's passion was constancy, protecting, studying, and staying close to the beings she loved. They were both doing exactly what they were meant to do, even if that meant doing it apart. Many people have wondered if things could have turned out differently, if Hugo had stayed or if Jane had chosen to follow him. But the truth, which Jane quietly hinted at later in life, was that their separation wasn't really about distance at all. It was about destiny. She once said something that revealed the heart of it all: "I am exposing his drive." She stopped herself before finishing the thought, then added softly, "He was so driven." That drive was what first drew her to him. She admired his passion, his certainty about what he wanted from life. But that same quality eventually pulled them in different directions. Hugo needed to explore. He was born to chase stories across Africa, to bring the wild to the world through his camera lens. Jane, on the other hand, was born to stay, to observe, to nurture, to protect. They both had unshakable callings. When National Geographic stopped funding Hugo's work at Gombe, he had no choice but to move on. But Jane couldn't. Gombe wasn't a project to her, it was her soul. If Hugo hadn't come along, the chimp story probably would have ended, she once said. Ironically, it was because of that story that their marriage couldn't survive. When she spoke of it in her later years, there was no sorrow in her voice, only peace. "We did the right thing," she said. "We kind of had to do it." Her words carried quiet wisdom. Jane's greatest act of love wasn't holding on, it was letting go. She had chosen her mission over her marriage not out of selfishness, but out of devotion. She understood that love isn't always about being together. Sometimes, it's about allowing both people to fulfill their purpose, even if it means walking separate paths. After the divorce in 1974, Jane didn't withdraw from the world. She threw herself deeper into her work. Her fame grew, and her research at Gombe expanded into one of the most significant wildlife studies in history. But even as she achieved global recognition, there was still an emptiness that no amount of scientific success could completely fill. That changed when she met Derek Bryson, the director of Tanzania's national parks. Derek was nothing like Hugo. He was a man of politics and power, known for being strict and intimidating. At first, Jane was afraid of him. She had heard that he was harsh, even unfriendly. But when they met, she saw something else, a man who truly understood the importance of conservation. Their relationship began as professional collaboration, built on mutual respect. But over time, it grew into something warmer and more personal. In 1975, after both had gone through divorces, Jane and Derek married. Unlike her first marriage, this one was quiet and grounded. There were no cameras, no wilderness love story for the world to romanticize. Instead, there was a sense of peace and stability. Derek used his influence to protect Gombe, implementing strict rules that limited tourism and kept the park safe from exploitation. For Jane, his support was invaluable. He wasn't just a husband, he was a guardian of the work she'd dedicated her life to. But even this love story wasn't meant to last. A few years into their marriage, Derek was diagnosed with cancer. Jane described it in her usual calm, understated way. "He got this horrible cancer. That was the end." He passed away in 1980, only 5 years after they married. The loss was devastating, but Jane found comfort in knowing that he had left a lasting legacy. She often said that without Derek, there might not be a Gombe today. Just as Hugo had helped her share the chimpanzee story with the world, Derek had helped protect that story for future generations. After Derek's death, Jane never remarried. When asked why, she simply said, "I didn't meet the right person, I suppose. My life was complete. I didn't need a husband." By then, she had discovered a deeper kind of companionship, the connection between purpose and peace. What she lost in marriage, she gained in meaning. The forest, the chimps, and her mission became her lifelong partners. When Jane Goodall passed away on October 1, 2025, at the age of 91, she was still doing what she had always done, traveling, speaking, and inspiring others to care for the planet. Even in her final year, she was unstoppable. She often talked about her 2 marriages, not with regret but with gratitude. Each man represented a different kind of love, one that helped her share her purpose with the world, and one that helped her protect it. After her death, tributes came from all over the world. World leaders, scientists, and celebrities all spoke about her impact. But the most heartfelt messages came from those who had worked beside her in Gombe. They remembered her walking through the forest at dawn, whispering soft greetings to the chimpanzees as if she were greeting old friends. She wasn't just a researcher, she was part of their world. Jane once said that her favorite animal wasn't the chimpanzee but the dog. It surprised many people, but it made perfect sense. To her, love was about loyalty, devotion, and presence. She believed in staying true, showing up, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. In her final television interview, she reflected on her life with quiet strength. "If I had left, there would be no Gombe, no long-term study, no understanding of what we share with the chimps," she said. "Sometimes love asks you to stay when everything else tells you to go." Those words captured the essence of her story. Her life wasn't defined by loss, but by devotion, the kind that endures even when it means standing alone. Jane Goodall didn't just study the wild. She became a part of it. Her story reminds us that true purpose often comes with sacrifice, and real love sometimes means letting go. In the end, her greatest legacy wasn't just her discoveries about chimpanzees, it was her unwavering belief in compassion, connection, and courage. She showed the world that living with purpose, even in solitude, can be the most powerful form of love.